when the extra Syrian refugees were to be brought from Australia, Tony Abbott's decision, welcomed by premiers all over the country, particularly the New South Wales Premier Mike Baird, was they're going to go to coastal areas, country towns, they'll go to the north, the south. Guess where they went? The same place they always go, Fairfield. Fairfield, an area very well known to Hugh McDermott, is in fact part of the area that he represents, but its local mayor says it's not about being anti-refugee. It's not saying we want to turn these people away, but it's like if you're going to bring an entire suburb of people here on top of the already more than 1,000 that we take every year, what about some schools? What about some roads? What about some stuff to actually facilitate this?
There are predominantly, I think it's 10 to 15,000 Assyrians who are living there now. They came over, refugees. They're all predominantly Christians. They came over since the 1980s. Now, the reason that a lot of people are being settled in that area is because that's where their families are. This issue was raised a year and a half ago when I was first elected, and has been talked predominantly with the state government about the infrastructure that's needed to have these people not only in accommodation but also in schooling and healthcare and other areas. And it is a big problem, and it will continue to be a big problem. Now, we are very welcoming of that community who's coming in because they're predominantly Christians who have fled ISIS from northern Iraq. Their family members have been there and are established there for 20 years. They're a valuable part of our community. Now, what isn't happening is that, and I have to give credit to Tony Abbott, who agreed to do the 12,000 people from basically northern Iraq, there isn't the infrastructure from the state government to back up the promises, and this is the problem. So we have a situation where every single school in the south of my electorate and in the neighbouring electorates of Fairfield are at over capacity. We have children coming in from refugee backgrounds into schools who haven't been assessed for special needs and things like that. We're having teachers and principals having to constantly, every day, deal with new issues with these kids. Now, the fact that kids have gone through enough trauma in the refugee camps, but then you've got accommodation. Now, they've said, oh, they can stay with family members. That's fine. We're not talking about family members who are really wealthy people. We're people who came out this year, are new Australians, been out here 15 years, worked their guts out, have got some decent life, and now they're having almost doubling the amount of people in their homes. This infrastructure, these nets aren't there to look after these people. And that's a failing of the state government predominantly.
Correct. And I've got to say, I'm not having a coded conversation about refugees. I'm not dog-whistling about whether we should or shouldn't take people. It's about where and how, and if the decision is here, then what do you do to accommodate those that are here? And I just want to show you again, the promises that were made by Mike Baird at the time was that people were going to go to Coffs Harbour, they were going to go to Albury, they were going to go all over the place. Nice. But where do they actually go? Well, you can have a look here. On the northern beaches of Sydney, just 12 people have been resettled. Between
and that's the thing. You look at those figures, it's like 80 or so people. They made a big song and dance about having these people up at Manly, 12 people. And where predominantly the rest of the 5,000 or so, and probably the next 5,000 or 6,000 will go out towards Fairfield, lower parts of the Cedar Prospect, into Cabramatta and to Fairfield. They're the areas that need it. These are people who basically really need the support, and the community is trying to do, not doing front page in the local papers in Manly because you've got a handful of family.
But that's what annoyed me here, Fiona, is again, the promise that the whole thing was, we can accommodate 12,000 people because they're going everywhere. The truth is they're not.
I just want to make 2 points, and I'll get back to you. Firstly, in the Fairfield LGA, just based on current projections, without the refugees or anything else, in the next 10 years, that area will increase by 30,000 people, just as it is. Right? We have a 10-year backlog for social housing. Right? We have over 20,000 people waiting for it. We have a situation that every single school is at capacity or more, right? And no new schools coming in or being built. Our hospital at Fairfield has more capacity and has not been upgraded or had money go towards it in 2 state budgets. Now, the state government is great at spending billions of dollars on big infrastructure programs, and they're infrastructure programs that should have been done many years ago. I can blame Carr or whoever you want to blame for it, but they needed to be done. But what the problem is, they're spending it on big infrastructure and not the micro-infrastructure that's needed. And that means like the schools. That means like the local health care. And that 100%. Needs to happen. In that part of Harefield, of LGA, in the bottom half of Smithfield, the top half of Fairfield or Cabramatta States electorates, or the federal seat of McMahon, the money needs to be spent. And we have not had 1 cent spent in that electorate, in mine or others, in the last 2 state budgets towards these issues, and they need to be.
Well, but Rowan, there's another thing here too, where we've seen the Sudanese issue in Melbourne and how the Sudanese crime gang can happen. But also the problem is that if everything's full, the thing about this story that I find to be the scandal is the complete lack of thought to say, well, OK, if that's full, we're somewhere else. Remember, and Mike Baird wanted to pretend, oh, well, we're just spreading it everywhere and therefore everyone will lift up. It was bullshit.
Mm. Yeah, well, the one I word which we haven't mentioned is integration. And the problem is, I mean, Fiona tells great stories about fantastic success stories, which I'm glad we're seeing amongst the Sudanese community, but we're not seeing the same stories in Melbourne for sure. What you tend to get, and this is the global experience, particularly the European experience, is if you don't actively go out of your way to integrate new communities into the host culture, if you like, you end up with problems. And if it's Brussels, you end up with Molenbeek. If it's Paris, you end up with the suburbs to the north of Neuilly. If it's London, you end up with East London. We must make sure that these people are absolutely integrated into the Australian way of life, and we must not buy this idea that these communities can just be left to exist in their own little world, their own bubble, without actively becoming a part of the Australian community. I'm thrilled to hear Hugh's comment that the majority of these are Christians.
Syrian Christians,
yes,
who
Syrian
have integrated
Christians.
very well over the last 20 years.
Because what's the percentage?
I haven't got them here in front of me, but it's 80%? A vast majority. No, because I know that I've talked to people and worked with people over the last 2 years since Abbott made the announcement about the families and the names going up, and groups like the Assyrian Resource Centre based in Fairfield, the Assyrian Universal Alliance, which is the peak body representing Assyrians not only in this country but in the US, in Iran and Iraq, Syrian Christians that is, have been putting those lists together of thousands of Assyrian Christians who are in refugee camps or in places outside of Mosul, you know, so they can come here for safety reasons. A lot of these people want to go home. They don't necessarily want to stay in Australia. There are many people, and there's a lot of political parties within the movement in Australia, here and overseas, who are saying, you know, thank God Australia has given us this, but we want to re-establish. We want to be back in Mosul. We want to get back in there and have an Assyrian homeland. And an Assyrian homeland is so important. For thousands of years, the Christians have been in the north of Iraq, and they've been persecuted. It's time they had their own homeland. And this is the time to do it. And the UN and the other bodies, and Trump and others, need to understand that this is what needs to happen in northern Iraq, a free and independent Assyrian homeland in the north of Iraq as part of the Iraqi Federation.
All right.